Well, Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane said all kinds of things during their press conference. We'll break it all down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Well, folks, welcome in. I am recording this just minutes after Brandon Beane and Terry Pegula wrapped up their press conference that lasted almost an hour, talking about Sean McDermott and the path forward for the Buffalo Bills. And so I want to work through some of the highlights of things they said, give you some reaction to it, and then really try to tie it all together with my central thought coming out of that session as it pertains to the direction and outlook of this team moving forward. So let's get into it. Terry Pegula started with a statement and shared why he fired Sean McDermott. And he made it clear that he fired Sean McDermott based on the result of the game in Denver. Said it had nothing to do with disconnect. Said he looked around that locker room after the game and saw Josh Allen head down and crying, and said he went up to him and said that was a catch, referring, of course, to the Brandon Cooks play, and said Josh Allen didn't even acknowledge Terry. Said he looked around at the faces of the players and said they needed to change. He felt like the team hit the proverbial playoff wall, and that he didn't believe that Sean McDermott was the coach that would get them out of it. And so he didn't really give you much indication that this was a swelling process, right? That it's been thought about for a long time. It was what Terry Pegula described as the result of the game in Denver and the emotion in the locker room, especially from Josh Allen. Terry was asked a follow-up about whether or not they won the game, and let's say that the play that was controversial called an interception was a catch. The Bills win a game-winning field goal. They go play in the AFC Championship game. Would Sean McDermott still have a job? And Terry was not willing to speculate on whether or not he would or would not. But he felt like, based on that result, that reaction, and believing that they've hit a proverbial playoff wall, that it was time to move on from Sean McDermott. And this is where I'm going to have a lot of agreement. And I'm not going to sit here and say it's directly the Broncos game, okay? But I do feel like it's justifiable to consider the playoff wall that they can't get through and say, you know what, we got to shake it up. I've maintained that thought since this news came through. I can totally live with that. Totally. Now, I think that Terry probably should have done a better job of making it less specific to the result in Denver and saying, hey, that was the cherry on top, but it's all of this, right? It's all of these playoff failures. But he really wanted to make it known that it was the way that he felt observing his team in the locker room, especially Josh Allen. Terry Pegula expressed his confidence in Brandon Beane in his new role as president of football operations and general manager. And he highlighted different executives that he brought in as validation for his belief in Brandon Beane. He mentioned Joe Schoen, who's the current general manager of the Giants. Debatable whether or not he's done a good job. Mentioned Dan Morgan, who's the current general manager of the Carolina Panthers. He mentioned Brian Gaine, who went to Houston, got fired, and came back to Buffalo. And then Dennis Hickey, which was a really strange person to invoke because he was the GM of the Dolphins. He didn't, that one didn't really make a lot of sense to invoke Dennis Hickey's name. But his initial thing that he wanted you to know about his belief in Brandon Beane was the people that he's brought into the organization, specifically Joe Shane, Dan Morgan, Dennis Hickey, and Brian Gaine. Terry Pegula acknowledged the criticism that I think many have extended based on what went down here. And Terry brought up the success of the team, and he talked about their playoff seeding every year of the last 7 and said, look, it's a great organization with great players, and that the roster is a direct result of Brandon Beane's work through the years. And said success over a long period of time means we're doing something right. He later had a quote that said, we have a great roster with good coaching. He's basically telling you that he believes that Brandon Beane has built a really outstanding roster, whether you like it or not. Like, we're not here to debate our own opinion of the roster. Terry Pegula thinks it's a great roster, and he believes that it's validated because of them being a perennial playoff team that's usually a pretty high seed. And then the coaching element has only been good. Great roster, good coaching. That's what he believes. And ultimately said they have an MVP quarterback who just completed his 8th season, and they need to help him get to the Super Bowl. Brandon Beane did say, I bear guilt, blame, and responsibility. There is no finger pointing. There are things that I, as in Brandon Beane, could have done better. And so that's how things really kind of started. And then you got into these things about Keon Coleman, the WGR interview, and Brandon Beane's character, which was brought up, and things got a little heated. And we're going to explore those things here on the other side of it, so folks, be sure to stick with me. Kicking off the year feeling good is the goal, right? And honestly, hydration is the easiest win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, focus, and mood all level up. But let's be real, plain water doesn't always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or just trying to stay consistent with your goals. That's where Drip Drop comes in. It's doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, even that fresh skin glow. I've been using Drip Drop as part of my daily routine, and honestly, it's a game changer, not just for workouts, but for every single day. And it tastes amazing. I love a lot of the flavors. They have peach, watermelon, lemon, lime, passion fruit. They're all delicious. Those are all part of the zero sugar options, but there's also 16 original flavors that you can choose from as well. And Drip Drop's science-backed formula is trusted by firefighters, medical professionals, and over 90% of top college and pro teams because it rehydrates you faster and more effectively than water alone. So right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. So go to dripdrop.com and use code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long and use that sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood Protection Markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move it. You can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps include risk, which is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. All right, folks, welcome back. We're continuing to react to this Brandon Beane, Terry Pegula press conference that mostly explained the decision to move on from Sean McDermott and kind of the big picture and all the things. And so Brandon Beane, or really Terry Pegula, was asked about a report that's surfaced by many about how 5 weeks ago in a meeting between Pegula, Beane, and McDermott, McDermott expressed dissatisfaction with the roster, and the report has been that didn't set well with Beane or Pegula, and so Terry was asked about it. And Terry said he didn't know where that came from and said they talked every day. Okay. What more can you say? Terry Pegula said it didn't happen. Terry Pegula was asked about Sean McDermott being fired, but Brandon Beane being promoted and why that was the decision. And pretty much Terry Pegula put the playoff failures on Sean. That's where he put it. He put Beane, or he elevated Beane because of the talent that existed on the roster that he believes in, that because of the sustained success that they've had, believes it's because of the talent they've had, and then basically said McDermott can't get them over the hump in the playoffs. Because that's a question about coaching over talent on the roster and how you give credit for the talent being there, and you still have a lot of sustained success, but maybe not the ultimate success. Terry continues to say that you don't have sustained success without great players and a great organization. And then he talked about like practice squad players making an impact and how that's an example of front office talent. You're probably thinking, well, isn't there a coaching piece to that too? Yeah, but I'm telling you what Terry said. I'm telling you what Terry said. Then things got pretty interesting, where Brandon Beane was asked about that WGR radio interview where he blew up on Jeremy White and Joe DiBiase. And obviously, I think anybody would watch the course of the Bills season and feel like that wide receivers were a problem. So he was asked if he regretted it. And I thought Brandon Beane's response here was fascinating. This is one that I was really curious to see what angle he was going to take on this. Beane said, "I'm a passionate person. My biggest regret is how that put pressure on the wide receiver group. He felt they were being picked on unfairly. He said he wasn't condescending, but it was an example of him having too much passion, and said that he needed to come to the defense of his players because obviously they weren't in a position to defend themselves." That's a heck of a spin. That's a heck of a spin. That's a heck of a spin. You're just too passionate. You're just too passionate. I struggle with that one. I really do. And what frustrates me is that the conversation that Beane chose to have, right, and inserted himself into, really overlooked so much of the context of the entire conversation that Jeremy and Joe were having. And then Terry Pegula just interrupts everything. Nobody asked him this question. It said, "Oh, by the way, the coaching staff wanted Keon." Nobody asked about Keon Coleman. But Terry Pegula inserted himself, interrupted Brandon Beane to say that was not Brandon Beane's choice and that the coaching staff wanted Keon, which is crazy to me for an owner to step in and say something like that in a moment like that. And that's a huge part. That's a huge part of this entire thing, is like assessing blame and taking that opportunity to make it like that was on the coaching staff is crazy. And I do give Brandon Beane some credit for how he later on made some clarifications. He said, "I made the pick. I wouldn't have turned in the card if I didn't believe in him," which I thought was a really admirable thing to say. And then, of course, as this is going on, social media is blowing up about this. You're thinking about Keon Coleman, like, this guy's over here catching strays. I know it hasn't worked out, but he doesn't deserve this. But through that, people are immediately bringing up video of Brandon Beane at the NFL Scouting Combine, watching Keon Coleman run a 40-yard dash and celebrating that it was slow because It meant that it would help him get to the Bills. Again, Brandon Beane came back and said, I made the pick. I wouldn't have turned in the card if I didn't believe in him. Pretty crazy thing for Terry Pegula to do, to step in and say something like that regarding a player that just finished his second year. That was your number one pick in the draft 2 years ago in a position that you need. There's no Keon Coleman's not playing for the Bills again after that. The owner comes out and says that. And I ultimately, maybe who cares, right? About the fact that Keon, it might be upset and might not play for the Bills again. I think that's kind of the expectation anyways. But what an asinine thing to say if you're Terry Pegula. Brandon Beane's talked about the overall roster construction and where, they were lacking at wide receiver. And he said that his number one priority is to protect Josh Allen. And then he talked about how paying Josh Allen, he went through pre-paying Josh versus post-paying Josh, and talked about how the commitment that you make to the quarterback and the emphasis that you put on protecting him leads to having to make roster concessions elsewhere, which I think is crazy to say. Quarterbacks and teams year after year that are paid are having a ton of success. This idea that you have to maximize a rookie quarterback contract because after you pay him, you can't win is silly. It's just not true. There's example after example after example after example of that just not being the case. Paid quarterbacks are winning Super Bowls and going to Super Bowls every year. That's not an excuse. It's crazy for Beane to continue bringing that up. How about this one? Terry Pegula was asked about Josh Allen's involvement in the decision to let go of Sean McDermott, and Terry Pegula said Josh did not have any input. He said he spoke to him afterwards, and those conversations will remain private. I shared on Bill's Squad. I shared on social media. Pretty much that. I said Josh didn't want this. And everybody assumed that, if Josh Allen wanted Sean McDermott to be the coach, then he'd still be the coach and that he would have to sign off on this. Nope, he didn't. He didn't, as I shared. They talked about the coaching search and how it's an open search. And some people would assume, and they were straight up asked, is there a front runner? Would you make a move like this to move on from Sean McDermott without something else in mind? And they said, absolutely not. It's an open search. They're open to old, young, first-time coaches. They're just trying to find the right one. So I guess that should lead us to consider all possibilities. The coaching search will be led by Terry Pegula, Pete Gelly, Terrence Gray, Brian Gaine, Laura Pegula, Brandon Beane, and Terry did say that Josh would have some input. When asked if the new head coach comes in with an expectation of Super Bowl or bust, Terry said, nope, can't say that to a new coach. Do your best job. Let's hope if the Bills lose in the playoffs next year, that it has a different feel than these other ones. Because this is going to get weird. I will say this. I did finish my All-22 review of Bills Broncos, and I sent out the All-22 clips to everyone in our Substack or our subtext, which I'd love for you to become part of. Go to thejoemarino.com or go to the show notes. There's a link to thejoemarino.com. Join the subtext of the Substack. You get a ton of extra content from me. You also get into our Discord channel where I'm going live tonight for our weekly herd hangout. It's exclusive. Me and Jerry Ostrowski, we make ourselves available, and then people come on and ask questions, and it's a really fun time. We do that every Wednesday. So if you want to be part of that, join the Substack or the subtext over at thejoemarino.com. But I did finish the All-22 review, and I'm not going to do an entire All-22 review episode, but I will say there were some horrible, horrible moments in that game that are far bigger. I won't say far bigger, that are of equal consequence to the 5 giveaways that the Bills offense had. You had some really big blunders by receivers. You had blunders by Josh Allen with throws. You had some tackling things. You had some defensive play calls. It was a very chaotic game. And like I said before, like I get it. These chaotic moments in the playoffs, not being able to get it done, not executing in the highest leverage of moments. I get it. Like whatever. Move on from Sean, shake it up. I really do get it. It's kind of the path forward and this structure that leaves me with the questions. And we got more to get to here next because Brandon Beane was asked about his character and if this was a power play by Beane. We also have the initial list of candidates that have been requested for interviews and a big thought that I have on the overall perception of the Buffalo Bills. We'll do all that here next, folks. Be sure to stick with me. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode every game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets you like most. Open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boost lets you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. The boost gives you more juice to the bets you already like. Instead of forcing you to play something new, you make your picks, then apply your profit boosts to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs are rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone, I'd go straight to Indeed and be specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, welcome back, folks. Let's talk more about this press conference and get to these candidates and kind of my central thought of what happened today. Terry was asked if this was a power play by Beane. I think it's easy to think that, or it feels like a reasonable question to me based on, hey, the head coach got fired, the GM stays and gets a promotion. Terry Pegula very quickly said if you are on a power play, then you're out, that he would have fired Beane immediately if he felt that was the case. And then Beane got pretty passionate. He said it's hurtful to even hear that. He said he walks in the door and his wife has tears on her face because of his character being questioned. He called it BS. And then he even went on to talk about how he defended Sean McDermott after the Ty Dunn article in 2023. Said he stood up and defended him and gave him a game ball after the game. So Brandon Beane was not here for you to question his character. He got pretty fired up. He really did. You could tell he was getting hot. Like he was mad. He was asked about the Darius Slay fiasco and said, he didn't go rogue. Said they loved Jamarcus Ingram. They didn't want him to go, but he'd also been an inactive player. Called it a very weird thing that happened, but he did not do something that was rogue. They were asked a good question. Terry was asked a good question about the sustained success and how Terry had even said, hey, like despite injuries, you have practice squad players stepping in and helping the team. Why is that more of an indictment on Beane than McDermott in terms of it being a favorable thing? And Terry said this: great roster, good coaching, no Super Bowl appearance. He said a coaching change was necessary to overcome, and he couldn't see it happening with Sean McDermott. Brandon Beane was asked if he would hire a GM. This is something that many have speculated about, including myself, because he's the president of football operations and general manager. Would he hire a general manager to work underneath him? He said no, he's still the GM. He was pretty straightforward on that. Brandon Beane was asked about the roster. How good is it? And he said, I believe in our players. I'm always going to defend our players. Said it's a 12-month process, but ultimately up to Terry to decide. Josh Allen's health was brought up. Brandon Beane said he might need a procedure on his foot, but it would not impact his availability for OTAs. Told you there was something wrong with his foot. That was a whole lot bigger than the nothing that they were making it out to be. This is where I really want to get to, as we've now seen a list of candidates, the initial list of candidates. So the initial interview requests are Joe Brady, Brian Daboll, you know those guys, Anthony Lynn, who was the Bills' interim coach when Rex Ryan left for like one game, went to the Chargers, was their head coach. I don't take him super seriously as a candidate. Anthony Weaver, who's the Dolphins defensive coordinator. I actually really like Anthony Weaver. Lou Anarumo, known for his time mostly with the Bengals, but he's the Colts' current defensive coordinator. And Grant Udinski, the Jaguars' offensive coordinator, very young, up-and-coming offensive mind. Now, one thing to keep in mind about this list of candidates, it's the initial list. I'm sure there's going to be more. And it also doesn't allow the Bills right now to request candidates from teams that are playing in the conference championship game. So the Patriots, Broncos, Rams, and Seahawks. And I would think there's some coaches on those staffs that the Bills are going to be interested in, mainly Davis Webb with the Broncos. You have Clint Kubiak with the Seahawks. And you also, with the Rams, you have Chris Shula, but also Nick Steelhouse. They're very bright, young offensive mind as well. So I'd anticipate a few of those being added to the mix. In fact, I kind of think that Davis Webb and Clint Kubiak are big-time contenders here. And they obviously are not part of this mix. But we will do an episode next really covering these candidates and diving into the pros and cons of all of them. But to me, this press conference was the opportunity for the new brain trust of Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane to give us an idea on the vision and for us to gain clarity on the decisions that were made. And I have a lot of concerns. I have a lot of concerns about Terry Pegula. I've had a lot of concerns about Terry Pegula based on his decision-making as an owner of as both the Sabres and the Bills. And you can kind of zoom out and consider all of that. Maybe the best decision he ever made was hiring Sean McDermott, who is now fired. I struggle to believe that there's a super favorable perception of Terry Pegula as an owner. Then you have Brandon Beane, who's been part of this, of course. I think he's done a lot of good. I think he's had some missteps. But what's the perception right now? What's the perception of Brandon Beane right now? People have a lot of questions. And for as much as they dismissed a lot of things that people are concerned about a power play and the reality of this roster, there's a lot of questions about Brandon Beane. And both of them pinned a lot of this back on the coach, mostly Terry Pegula. He's very quick to throw Sean McDermott under the bus. Expectations are high for this team, right? Like, they just fired a coach that had historic success, like in terms of wins and point differential, and obviously they didn't go to the Super Bowl. But every other measure of dominance that you can have, the Bills kind of had it, right? And you have a locker room here that loved the previous coach. They loved him. I'm not saying that Sean McDermott should stick around, but I do think about this job from the outside looking in. And thank God for Josh Allen. Because I think you got big questions about the owner. I think you got big questions about the GM. I think you have a bunch of big questions about what happened in this press conference. Expectations are super high, and you got a locker room that loved their previous coach. Thank God for Josh Allen. Because if you're being honest, what's the appeal? What's the appeal? The appeal is Josh Allen. The Bills didn't have a quarterback right now. I'd be deeply concerned about how this job is perceived. Get it right. Get it right. And get it right with Josh Allen, because, boy, there's a lot to be concerned about with this owner, this GM, and this pivot. I don't have any issues. What they moved on from Sean McDermott, I get it. They got to nail this hire. They got to nail it. Because I don't know how attractive of a job this is if Josh Allen's not the quarterback. Mike Greenberg on X tweeted out, the leadership of the Buffalo Bills has done the impossible this morning. They've made the opportunity to coach a team with Josh Allen as a quarterback less appealing. Bill Barnwell, think you can give players and coaches some grace for saying things they might regret during emotional press conferences in the moment after a brutal loss. This is days later, an absolute meltdown in Buffalo. Had somebody ask me if Terry Pegula is now a worse owner than David Tepper. You should see my text messages. Not a lot of warm fuzzies coming out of this press conference in terms of how people are perceiving this situation. You got to nail this hire. You got to nail this hire. And hope that they can bring this together and get us to the success that we all want. Because I'm concerned about this owner. I'm concerned about this GM. And I'm concerned about what this coach has to step into. Thank God for Josh Allen. All right, folks, that's it. Thanks for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Our next conversation will be covering these candidates, which I'm excited to dive into, folks. Don't miss anything. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.